You know the one I'm talking about. The anxious partner, the one who always initiates the hard conversations, the one who sends the follow-up texts, the one who says, "I'm sorry," first, even when they're not the one who broke the connection. For so long, they carry the emotional weight of the relationship on their back, hoping that one day the person they love will meet them in the middle. But here's what no one talks about. When that anxious partner finally stops chasing, finally goes quiet, finally chooses themselves, that's the moment the avoidant partner's nightmare begins. Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and in this video we're going to talk about a turning point that most people never see coming, because it doesn't show up with yelling, slamming doors, or big goodbyes. It shows up in silence. It shows up when the person who always held the connection together with both hands finally sets it down. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And what's so powerful is that this moment often marks the beginning of real change. Not because it's meant to punish the avoidant partner, but because when the anxious stops showing up, the avoidant finally feels what their distance actually costs them. So if you've been in a relationship where you always did the emotional work, where you felt like if you just loved a little harder or asked for a little less, they might finally stay, you're not alone. And this video is for you. We're going to unpack why avoidant partners seem so calm in disconnection, and why that calm often shatters the moment you actually let go. Because underneath the avoidance fear of closeness is an even deeper fear that when someone finally sees the real them, they'll leave. And when the anxious walks away, that fear becomes real. Stick with me until the end, because I want to give you a deeper understanding of this dynamic. Not so you'll go back and chase, but so you'll finally stop blaming yourself. If this speaks to your experience, hit subscribe, leave a comment to share your story, and let's keep building secure, grounded love. Starting with you, let's begin. In many anxious avoidant dynamics, there's a silent agreement, unspoken but deeply ingrained. The anxious partner becomes the emotional glue. They're the one who always circles back after conflict. They initiate the check-ins, they soothe the disconnection, and they take the lead in emotional repair. Even when they're hurt, confused, or exhausted, they still show up, because at their core, they're terrified of losing connection. And the avoidant partner? They come to expect this. They grow used to the rhythm. They pull away, shut down, avoid the hard talks, because they've learned the anxious one will always return. But what happens when that pattern breaks? What happens when the anxious partner, who spent months or years tiptoeing around emotional landmines, finally stops reaching out? Not out of bitterness, not to punish, but because something inside them shifts. Because they realize that constantly chasing someone who's emotionally unavailable has slowly chipped away at their self-worth. When the anxious walks away, not in a storm but in stillness, something incredible happens. The avoidant is no longer protected by the illusion that someone else will always close the gap. They're left in the silence they once craved, and that silence starts to echo. At first, they might feel relief. Finally, no pressure, they think. But after a while, that relief turns into discomfort, then confusion, then grief. Because for the first time, they're confronted with the cost of emotional distance. They're forced to face what they've been avoiding all along: vulnerability. I worked with someone named Taylor, who spent over 2 years in a push-pull relationship. She was always the one to text after a fight, always the one to say, "Let's talk," until one day she didn't. Not because she was playing a game, but because she had finally reached emotional burnout. She loved him, but she loved herself more. And once the avoidant partner realized she was no longer chasing, something shifted in him. He started texting more, then calling, then showing up in ways he never had before. Not because she convinced him, but because her absence confronted him with everything her presence had been softening. That's the paradox. Avoidant partners often equate silence with peace, but it's not peace, it's protection. And when the anxious partner finally stops holding the emotional tension between them, the avoidant is left to feel all the emotional weight they've been deflecting. And that's where the real transformation begins, not just for the avoidant, but for the anxious partner too. Because choosing to walk away from emotional imbalance isn't giving up, it's growing up. This moment, when the anxious stops showing up, can be painful, yes, but it's also powerful. It's the first time the avoidant is forced to reckon with the gap they've always counted on someone else to close. And for the anxious partner, it's often the first taste of emotional freedom they've had in a long time. Eventually, even the most emotionally generous person hits a wall. It doesn't happen overnight, and it rarely comes with fireworks. When the anxious partner walks away, it's usually not loud. There's no slammed door, no dramatic exit, no final speech that demands closure. More often than not, it's quiet, it's calm, it's heavy, and it's final, not because they stopped caring, but because they finally started caring for themselves. This moment is what I call the emotional collapse of the pursuer. It's not a collapse in the sense of failure, but a breaking point. A shift where the anxious person realizes that continuing to pursue, to fix, to explain, to reach out is no longer an act of love. It's become a form of self-neglect. After being consistently unheard, unseen, or emotionally dismissed, something inside them starts to change. The energy that once fueled their hopeful efforts now becomes tired, resigned. They don't hate their avoidant partner. They're not trying to punish them. They just reach a point where their nervous system can no longer survive the chronic emotional starvation. Let me share a real story. One of my clients, Emily, spent months in a cycle with her avoidant boyfriend. He'd get close, pull away, blame her for wanting too much, then return just enough to keep the connection alive, and every time he pulled back, she stepped in, writing long messages, initiating talks, giving space while still staying emotionally present. But over time, something inside her began to wither. She found herself second-guessing her every move, afraid to express even the most basic needs. Then, one day, after another stretch of silence from him, she didn't reach out, not because she didn't miss him, but because something inside her had quietly said, enough. That moment changed everything. Her detachment didn't come from bitterness, it came from clarity. It was no longer about fixing the relationship, it was about protecting herself. And that's what most avoidant partners don't see coming. They rely, often unconsciously, on the anxious partner to keep the emotional thread between them intact. They know the anxious one will text, will call, will apologize, even for asking to be loved. So when the anxious partner goes silent, not in anger but in acceptance, the avoidant feels something they're deeply unfamiliar with: emotional consequence. Avoidant silence often feels like peace to the person who's pulling away. It gives them control, it protects them from vulnerability. But here's what they learn the hard way: that silence only feels safe when someone else is still filling the emotional space. When the anxious partner detaches, that silence becomes loud, it becomes uncomfortable. And for the first time, the avoidant has to face the very thing they've spent years building walls against: being emotionally alone with themselves. And this is why detachment is so powerful. Not because it punishes the other person, but because it breaks the cycle. It disrupts the pattern where one partner overflungs while the other emotionally disappears. It allows the anxious person to reclaim their energy and redirect it inward, toward healing, peace, and self-trust. And for the avoidant, it can be a wake-up call. Sometimes, the loss becomes the mirror. The absence becomes the thing that finally shows them what connection actually costs. But let me be clear, this isn't about playing games. Walking away with self-respect isn't a tactic. It's not about making someone miss you. It's about returning to yourself. You've tried love through proving, through fixing, through emotional labor, and when that fails, what's left isn't nothing. It's you. And you are not empty just because someone couldn't meet you. In fact, you're more full than ever, full of self-awareness, full of quiet strength, full of the kind of peace that doesn't depend on whether someone else decides to show up. And that is the true power of the moment when the anxious walks away. Not as a reaction, but as a return to self-worth, to emotional balance, and to a love that doesn't ask you to carry the whole thing alone. Because when you stop filling in all the gaps, the avoidant partner isn't left with you, they're left with themselves. And that, more than any conversation or confrontation, is what changes everything. There's a turning point in every anxious-avoidant dynamic that no one really expects, especially the avoidant. It happens quietly, often without warning. The anxious partner who once chased, reached out, soothed, and tried over and over again to bridge the emotional gap finally stops, not in a dramatic explosion, not in one final plea, but with calm, clean clarity. They stop reaching, they stop fixing, they stop giving energy to a connection that was never mutual. And that's the moment the avoidant starts to feel something they've spent their entire attachment system avoiding: emotional absence. At first, the avoidant might welcome the space. It feels familiar, safe. They may even breathe a sigh of relief. Finally, no pressure. Finally, some peace. But that peace isn't peace at all. It's self-protection. It's the buffer they've used for years to shield themselves from intimacy. And what they often don't anticipate is that when the anxious partner stops showing up, the silence they once craved turns into something else entirely: lonely. The same space that felt like freedom suddenly becomes disorienting. What used to feel like control now feels like a void. Because as much as avoidants tell themselves they're fine on their own, what they often don't realize is how much they depended on the anxious partner to keep emotional connection alive. The anxious one always texted first, always initiated the conversation, always did the hard work of repair after. When that stops, when the pattern breaks, it exposes how passive the avoidant has really been, and for the first time they feel the consequences of emotional distance. I worked with someone named Jordan who lived this exact experience. He had been in a relationship for over a year with someone who leaned anxious. She would bring up concerns, express her feelings, and always try to reconnect, even when he pulled away. He said things like, "I just need space," or "I'm not good at emotions," and she respected that until she couldn't anymore. One day, after weeks of emotional shutdowns and vague texting, she stopped reaching out. He didn't send a long goodbye or try to fix anything. She just stopped showing up. Jordan told me later, "At first I thought, finally, she's giving me room. But after a few days, the silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. I kept checking my phone, waiting for her to come back like she always did. And when she didn't, I started to feel it. Like, really feel what I'd been avoiding." That moment was his turning point, not because she begged him to change, but because her absence forced him to face what her presence had protected him from: emotional accountability. Avoidant individuals often carry a deep fear, not just of being smothered, but of being truly seen and rejected. That's the irony. It's not that they don't want love, it's that love, real love, exposes the parts of them they've worked hard to hide: vulnerability, need, fear. And when the anxious partner walks away, especially in quiet self-respect, it brings that fear to the surface. What if I was fully seen and they still left? That fear isn't about the partner, it's about their own internal shame. And here's where the real growth can begin for both sides. For the avoidant, this can be a rare opportunity to face themselves, to ask, what part of me keeps sabotaging intimacy? Why did I only start missing them when they stopped needing me? For the anxious partner, it's a chance to reclaim energy that was constantly poured into someone else's emotional comfort and redirect it inward, to self-soothe, to rebuild confidence, and to create space for a connection that feels reciprocal. It's important to say this: the anxious walking away doesn't always bring the avoidant back. And it's not supposed to. This isn't a strategy or a manipulation. It's not about teaching them a lesson. It's about honoring your own nervous system after months or even years of over-functioning in a relationship that couldn't meet you halfway. But for those avoidants who are ready to grow, that moment when the anxious detaches can be the beginning of something real. the beginning of self-awareness, of emotional risk, of learning to reach instead of retreat. And for the anxious partner, it's often the beginning of peace, the kind that doesn't come from being chosen, but from finally choosing yourself. Let's wrap this up with the truth most people don't hear enough. Walking away is not weakness, it's growth. Especially for the anxiously attached partner, it marks a powerful emotional turning point. It's not about giving up on love or closing your heart. It's about finally saying, I will no longer abandon myself to hold a connection together. That choice doesn't come from anger, it comes from clarity, from maturity, from honoring your emotional limits and choosing peace over anxiety, self-respect over silent waiting. For the avoidant partner, that loss often becomes a mirror. The person they believed would always be there suddenly isn't. And in that silence, they're left to face the very vulnerability they spent the relationship protecting themselves from. It's not punishment, it's consequence. And in many cases, it becomes the starting point for genuine emotional growth. Sometimes, the pain of losing someone who showed up consistently becomes the only thing strong enough to break through their defenses. This moment, the anxious finally letting go, is more than a relationship ending. It's a shift, a reset. It's the place where old patterns fall apart so that something new, healthier, and more self-respecting can begin. Whether that's a renewed connection built from a more secure place, or a new chapter of solo healing and personal peace, either way, it's forward movement. So if you're the one who's always tried, always reached, always waited, and you're starting to feel the quiet pull to choose yourself, know this: you're not quitting, you're evolving. And you don't have to chase love to be worthy of it. The kind of love that lasts won't require you to lose yourself to keep it. Thank you so much for watching this video and for allowing yourself to explore these deep and often painful dynamics with honesty and courage. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. What was your breaking point? What did you learn when you stopped showing up the same way? And if you're on a journey to build stronger emotional boundaries, break free from anxious avoidant loops, and grow into more secure, grounded connection, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for weekly content, and stay connected. I'm Jim Rohn, and I'm here to help you build the kind of love that starts with you and flows from a place of peace, not fear. Until next time, be kind to yourself. You're not too much. You're finally just enough for you. And that's where real healing begins.